So today's Bible story is epic. It's about Joseph. You find his story towards the end of the book of Genesis, which is the first book in your Bible. I know some of you in your room right now, you have these kinds of Bibles. There's different kinds of Bibles. We use the New International Version of the Bible. I like to read the Bible off my phone. I have the Bible app, and so that's a great way I can read the Bible anytime. But today, we're talking about Joseph. And like I said, his story is epic. Now, story of Joseph starts pretty good for him. He's just a normal kid, has a lot of brothers, big family, and God has given him this crazy ability to have dreams that kind of tell him the future. And in his dreams, he sees he's gonna rule over his family one day, which is interesting. But here's the thing, his brothers, they hate Joseph. And one day, they hate him so much, they sell him as a slave. Yeah, they sell him into slavery.
Okay, that doesn't make sense, because I know you guys have siblings. I have a brother. I love him, but I would never hate him that much to sell him into slavery.
Yeah.
Why? Why does his brother hate him?
Yeah, hopefully you wouldn't want to sell your siblings into slavery. But it's because they're just jealous. Joseph was dad's favorite. He gave Joseph this fancy robe that he wore all the time. Telling them about his dreams, I'm going to rule over you one day, probably didn't help.
No.
But anyway, Joseph is a slave. He travels far away to the land of Egypt. Things start to get better. He's made the top servant in this guy's house, a guy named Potiphar. But then Potiphar's wife lies about Joseph, and Joseph gets thrown into prison. So it goes from bad, a little bit better, to worse. And then he's in prison for a long time. He meets a couple guys that actually work for the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so he's like, hey, when you guys get out of jail, tell Pharaoh about me. But you know what? They actually forget about him. They get out of prison and they don't tell Pharaoh. So his life was pretty tough.
It is really tough. And I'm thinking, if God is with him during this time, why would God allow all this tough stuff to happen? What's the reason? Yeah,
great question. I've thought that several times when I've read it. And you know what? It does say God is with him, but yet he still goes through some really bad stuff. Mm-hmm. And here's why. To answer your question, the rest of the story has to be told. So eventually, Pharaoh has this crazy dream. And so then the guys that work for him are like, oh yeah, I remember Joseph. So Joseph goes to Pharaoh, interprets his dream, and Pharaoh's so impressed, he's like, I'm gonna put you in charge of all of Egypt. And so Joseph is in charge of collecting a bunch of food, because Pharaoh's dream was basically they're gonna run out of food. So Egypt collects all this food with Joseph in charge. And it not only saves Egypt, it ends up saving the whole world from starvation. Guess who travels to Egypt to get food from Joseph?
I can only imagine his brothers.
That's right. His brothers show up. And again, all this bad, like you said, why did all this bad stuff happen? Well, Joseph actually says this to his brothers. It's in Genesis 50, verses 19 through 20. It says, but Joseph said to his brothers, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So Joseph trusted God so much. He understood that if he hadn't gone through all that bad stuff, he wouldn't have gotten to the place where he could save his family and really the whole world. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's so cool. Because I'm thinking, if I was in Joseph's shoes, I would not be able to think that all this bad stuff is for good. Yeah. I would definitely, my brother sold me into slavery, I'd be like, well, this is great. What do I do from here? But the fact that Joseph was still able to trust God through that, and that knowing that God always has a plan and was always doing the right thing, and then eventually he got to save the whole world and his brothers. That is so incredible.
Yeah, I know we all go through tough stuff in life, but we gotta know, our main point today, God always has a plan. Sometimes we make mistakes, we get ourselves into trouble. Sometimes it's like Joseph, we didn't do anything wrong and we go through tough stuff. Either way, God is there with you. He will take care of you. He will see you through these difficult things, no matter what it is, because God always has a plan. So we're gonna talk more about this in our groups right now. Have a great week. And remember, God always has a plan.